How is faith the substance of things hoped for? We're going to be talking about that a little bit today in episode 58.
What's up, Josh?
Well, it's been kind of an interesting day so far. Saturdays are always kind of confusing to me because my schedule, I'm used to like having a tight schedule and everything being like chaotic in its own respect, but like in a scheduled chaos. But
That you have most control over.
Saturdays are a little bit different because I'm sometimes at the
beck and call. I'll say it.
Yeah, at the beck and call. Yeah, because so my wife has a bakery business that she makes cakes for, and sometimes they got to be delivered and stuff. Sometimes those delivery dates move very quickly and very close to the time that they were originally planned. So a lot of times on Saturdays, I'm just kind of sitting there like, what am I going to do in the next hour?
So today you went from a 10:30 delivery to a 1 o'clock delivery,
like
right?
that, yeah,
So I mean
yeah.
that much of a difference that you.
Yeah, because there's a bunch of things that have to sort of be coordinated.
Yeah.
There's the actual preparation of the cake. There's the time of the party. There's the time of the people that are getting the cake that have to get to the party and prepare it and all this.
Right.
So yeah, and all those things are fluid. So I'm just kind of there, kind of like bobbing in an ocean of chaos.
You have to be there whenever
Right.
it's ready to go.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Challenging.
right.
But you made it today to
Yeah.
the last half-hour photography club, which Chris and I were at, and
Right.
that was fun.
Yeah.
I had a couple of new people. And, had a good time talking about how to use photography as a ministry and just different theories on photography, or different not theories necessarily, but how to use photography. Nothing technical.
Right.
Just how to frame up a shot and shoot it and look at the light and the background and all that kind of fun stuff. So
Yeah.
that was fun.
Well, last week we talked about your musical preferences at the
Yes.
moment.
Right.
And
Right.
so I'm curious how that's evolved this week.
About the same. I've been listening to Elton John lately, the
Yeah.
best of Elton John, and just kind of chilling out. And it was either Elton John or Rush this week.
Okay.
I'm spending a lot of time listening to them in the Camaro. And at home yesterday, I stayed home and set up my TV, stereo, and turntable. So now I'm going
You got
to
the vinyl out.
Yes, I've got the vinyl out, and I have this many albums. It's about a foot and a half of albums
Right.
left over from back in the day. And
Now,
I
when
kinda,
we open up your house at the front door, does smoke come out?
no, back in the day it would have, but not this time, not anymore. But I was thumbing through them and just, man, talking about getting nostalgic. Good gracious, some albums in there that I haven't seen in so long.
Yeah.
I can't wait to just go through there and stick an album on and sit and listen to it. Old Buckingham Nicks, before Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham joined Fleetwood Mac. They did a Buckingham Nicks album. To me, it's really good, but it was a financial flop. But I have that album. It's not, I don't want to say it's rare, but you don't find it. It is rare, but doesn't mean it's expensive
Right.
or valuable. It's valuable to me. But anyway, so it's old Chicago and Jimi Hendrix and things like that I'll listen to on vinyl, and I have it set up the way I like it, with the speakers strategically placed at ear level, and the TV is coming through the speaker. So I spent all day yesterday doing that. I was very happy with the outcome. But today, all I'm going to talk about real quick is some of the audio books I've been listening to. And one of them is called Shut Up Legs by Jans Voigt. And I'll show this. Jans Voigt was a domestique writer, professional writer for 20-something years.
Related to John Voight,
No,
the actor? Okay.
he is not. This guy is very interesting because he's very charismatic. if he wasn't as charismatic as he was, you would probably you wouldn't hear much about him.
Mm-hmm.
He was talented in the way that he was very strong. He was 6'3", 170 pounds.
Right.
Now, you think, oh, that's a thin dude. He was huge in cycling numbers. That's a big guy in cycling numbers. 170 pounds racing, 167 he said he was at the lightest racing. 6'3", I think.
So this is telling me I'm not really suited for bicycle racing.
No, not the typical cycling.
Maybe if it's just downhill.
Downhill, you
Then I'll
would
have an
kill
advantage.
it, man. If it was straight downhill, you'd be good. You'd be really good. My lightest weight was 142 racing, and man, good gracious, it's one thing to be 142 or 145 and have lost strength, but whenever I raced once in Solly, North Carolina, in the mountains of North Carolina, I was 140, 145, 142, and really strong. I won by like 7.5 minutes.
Yeah.
I was almost ashamed of how much I won by. I probably should have been in the category up. I didn't realize that I was going to win that much. But it's hard to keep that strength and the weight down. That's the whole thing. And with him, he was one of the guys. Jans Voigt is one of the guys that he would go up to the front, and he had what we called a big engine. He could go up to the front of the peloton, peg it, just go 30 miles an hour, and stay up there for miles and miles and miles. And people are struggling to stay on. Straight line. It's not a peloton anymore, and somebody's up there going that fast, straight line, and people are just being shit off the back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can't keep up. I can't keep up. And once you get out of that draft, you're done. You're done. You can't get back on unless your teammate comes back. Your teammates come back and help you pull up. Anyway, he was really good. He was honest. From East Germany, and what's interesting about his story is him being from East Germany when the wall fell down, how his life changed because he grew up in a communist country. And he had some positive things about, there were some good positive things about communism. He stayed.
Wait, did you say there's some good positive things about communism?
And as he experienced it.
Okay.
This is him talking.
Something good came out of his experience with communism.
He liked the medical.
I was about to disagree with you fundamentally there.
This is just from what he was saying.
Right.
He benefited, his family benefited from the medical attention that his daughter got from being in the communist country.
Right.
That's just what he said. That's his voice.
So, was he the kind of cyclist that was famous? Like, was it like a good reflection on East Germany for him to be out there racing under the flag of East Germany?
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay.
Very good.
Because that's what I read a lot of times about communist China, like the athletes and the stars and stuff like that. Like, their families are taken care of because they're representing communist China.
Yeah.
Other people don't get the same treatment, but it's kind of like if you're building us up in the eyes of the world around us, then we're going to, help facilitate that.
Right. Yeah, that might be.
Yeah.
That might be. He hasn't mentioned that so far in his in the audio book, and I'm only 3/4 of the way through it, but he had positive things to say and he had negative things to say. He would say something that was negative that he didn't. It was just a part of life. For example, whenever his kids were born, he registered them to get a car. And by the time they were able to drive, they still had to be on a waiting list to receive a car.
Right.
And I'm using those words very carefully, to receive a car.
That was the problem in communist Russia as well, like the means of manufacturing and production, all that stuff.
Right.
Once it comes under the control of the state, it just dies.
Yeah, right. So anyway, that's interesting to hear his perspective on how the good things, the bad things, the struggles, however, and how he maneuvered around different countries, riding for different teams, and how he managed to learn languages in France and whatever. It was just interesting to see.
Yeah.
And he's such an extrovert, and he was very unique. He's still alive, still a very unique person. To be able to live that life in such different environments. You know what I mean? Just unbelievably resilient. And he did a lot of that while he was married.
Right.
6 kids, got 6 kids. And in order for him he made a living traveling around different places, different teams, in riding his bike, for more than half the year, and then coming back home and so forth. But he was fun to watch. Don and I used to watch him race. I think he retired in 2012. But he was a kind of guy who would go off the front of the peloton, and he would gamble on staying off, riding by himself, going really strong, and getting 2, 3, 7, 10 minutes away, and gamble on the people coming back, the peloton managing to come back to him, or he would ride for somebody else and give them a draft and as a teammate. And he chose to be on teams that he wanted to be on, rather than getting the big money.
Yeah.
Lance asked him twice to be on Lance's team.
I was just about to ask if he were ever involved with Lance Armstrong.
Oh yeah. Well, involved in that they raced the same races. It was the same time period.
Yeah.
And Lance asked him twice to be on his team, and Jan said, no, I couldn't. If I'm on your team, you are the undeniable leader. If I'm on these other teams, I have my own opportunities to win races at times, and in addition to getting the satisfaction of helping other people win. So it was more important to him to get
Armstrong's
along.
team was more about getting Armstrong across the finish line.
On the big races, yes. There's nobody in modern cycling that can be in winning form year-round. It's just physically impossible. Back in the day, there are people like Eddie Merckx that could do those things, but not the way modern cycling is. So you have to periodization. You have to plan to be at your peak during Tour de France. Plan to be at your peak during Tour of Georgia or whatever. But you can't go month to month and month back to back and be as strong as you need to be the leader. So yes, in the big races, all the ones that everybody would know about, Tour de France, yes, Lance was. You get behind me or you get off this team. One of the two. He was the boss, no doubt about it.
Okay.
No doubt.
So the name of the book is
Shut Up Legs.
Shut Up Legs. What's the significance of that name?
He would tell his legs to shut up, quit hurting. You're not hurting. Keep pedaling. Pedal hard or pedal hard. He just tells. I tell my legs to shut up. That's my best East German accent.
I remember when I was in engineering school as an undergrad, I had this calculus teacher who grew up in communist Russia behind the Iron Curtain, and gained a lot of success in communist Russia. I think he worked for the KGB at one time. He was, like cream of the crop as far as being in academic circles, nationwide notoriety, that kind of stuff. And he came to know Christ in an underground church in Russia, emigrated, came to the United States, and basically set up shop here. And I was fortunate enough to be able to, have him as a professor.
Oh, nice.
And even more than the calculus stuff that he taught, he also taught like engineering courses I had fluid mechanics and stuff. But he would go off in these rabbit trails about God and like the nature of God, attributes of God, and different things like that. And I learned more about and enjoyed more the stuff he said about that than I did about calculus, and probably learned more about the nature of God in those calculus classes than I did in any of the Bible classes I took, and because it was a different perspective. But the way it relates to this, he used to make the comment of, like, you're generally capable of more than you think you are, and he would say it, sort of explain that in terms of both like physical things and mental things. Like he would say the strongest part of your brain is your butt, right? If you can force yourself to sit down and tackle a problem, eventually you'll come out on top. And usually the smartest people are the ones that can sit there the longest. and wrestle with the problem until they come to a solution. But
Right.
also in the physical, like your body wants to shut down, or your brain wants to make you think your body has to shut down
That's
long
right.
before it actually has to.
That's right.
And so, like if you can conquer the mental aspect of it, you can go a lot farther than you would otherwise. And I remember at the same time I had a couple friends who were going into the Marine Corps, after college, and they were trying to get in physical shape to where they could, pass the physical test to get into it. And one of them was running 3 miles, I think, in 24 minutes. I forget. I think it was 24 minutes. Might have been something else. It's been a long time, but I kind of made it a personal goal. I want to get to that point by the end of this year too. So I'd go out every night and I'd run the track. And I'd start on the inside track and I'd one run lap, and I'd go to the next. All the different lanes.
Right. Yeah.
So, all the different lanes have different lengths to them because of their radii at the endpoints. But so I would start on the inside one, work my way out, and I'd go back to the inside and run 2 laps, work my way out.
Cool.
To the inside, run 3 laps until I got to the point where I could run, and I only did it one time. I ran 3 miles in 24 minutes, and I remember running that 3 miles and wanting the whole time to just sit there and like, I'm tired, I'm worn out, I'm exhausted, I'm in pain, I don't want to do this anymore. And I remember my calculus teacher thinking, no, this isn't actually where your endpoint has to be. Like, this is a mental thing. If you can conquer your mind, you can do it. And I did it. I ran 3 miles in 24 minutes.
Nice.
I never did it again.
But you did it that one time.
I reached my goal.
Fantastic. It's a good lesson.
It's like, shut up, body.
Yes. Good luck. That's exactly right. Shut up, legs. That's where that came from, for sure.
Yeah.
So anyway, any audio book, I've been finding a lot of joy in that lately. Is just listening to music and listening to audio book. It allows me to get a lot more done. I mean, I simply just won't sit down and read as much as I used to.
Right.
And maybe it would be better if I did, but I don't.
It's difficult to carve out that time. I've found because I have a whole stack of books waiting for me to either finish reading or to start reading.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to carve out time where you don't have anything else going on. You can sit and read. However, I have a lot of like mentally dormant time that I can capitalize on, like driving, from one appointment to another, or
right.
sitting there drafting a floor plan or something like that. I can have something running, and so that's when I usually. I don't do too many audiobooks, not because I don't like them, just because I'm usually like listening to podcasts or lectures or something like that.
You're doing something though. You're listening to something that's it's really the same thing.
Yeah,
that's
audiobooks are just not books.
Yeah. That's right. So I'm enjoying that. And that's what the older I get, the more I realize many things is not going to change in my life, and this is the way I'm going to consume more knowledge. Is doing it that way, and it's not the most efficient. I've been a reader before, where I would just read a lot of stuff, and every second I had, I sit down and read because I was in this book. I'm just not there right now.
Yeah.
So, audiobook I can get done in a week,
right?
With the time that I allot in between music and doing whatever. I ride on my mountain bike, and I listen to audiobook or music or whatever, and it's working out really well.
Now here's a question: do you find that you gravitate more towards audiobooks that reflect your current mood?
No, audiobooks it's not really a mood like the music is, because it's more long term,
right?
Over weeks, where songs can be just 3 minutes or 6 minutes or whatever. Cycling. I've read or listened to 3 Fleetwood Mac audiobooks.
So you're more like the autobiographical nonfiction type, right?
Yes.
You don't do like fiction books or anything?
No, not recently. Okay. Not recently. I don't. What I've enjoyed, and this is a new thing for me, is listening to books back to back about the same time period, topic, area, and people. For example, listen to Rumors, The Making of Rumors, with
The Fleetwood Mac
Fleetwood
CD,
Mac,
yeah,
yep,
album,
making of that album by the engineer that was there.
Right.
I think I talked about that a little bit last time.
yeah.
And then listening to Stevie Nicks' version of that same time period.
Okay.
And then listening to Mick Fleetwood's version of that same time period and see how they mesh.
Right.
And so far they mesh pretty close.
Okay.
You know what I mean? They're pretty close, even if it's not Stevie Nicks writing it. Somebody's writing it for her,
Okay.
or as a result of having spending a month with her or whatever. But with the engineer, it's him writing. It's him that's writing this book. So you get the first person, and then you get like the second person view, and it's all so close that they talk about distinguishing distinctive times during those time periods and how they came about and their point of view. Like if there was a big argument between Stevie and Lindsay one day, what that argument was about and how it looked to them. It's surprisingly very, very similar.
Do you ever find, like, take that example, for instance, where they're arguing about something and they ultimately reach a resolution? When you're looking back at that, we often think of arguments as like a bad thing, but sometimes, the resolution of an argument leads to, some improvement of some kind, or a different, leads to a different way of operating, whatever. Mm-hmm. So, I guess, how do we define in those experiences we have in our life, what's a good experience versus what's a bad experience?
In our lives?
Yeah. Because here again, like in the middle of that argument, it's a bad thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it might, and that might be true.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes, like when I look back in my life, there are different things that I've gone through that in the moment I would think, oh my goodness, it's a horrible, horrible thing.
Yeah.
But with the benefit of hindsight, I can see, well, that bad, what I thought was a bad time led to something that was really good, and vice versa has also been true. Mm-hmm. And we see that in Scripture all the time as well. So in the moment, how do we approach that?
Well,
because the lines between good and bad seem to be blurred a lot.
Okay, I'll answer it this way, and I think it's a little sideways from what you're asking, but from whenever I'm viewing another conflict, in this example, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, they never really came to a conclusion. They never really solved anything. When they got to a certain point, they just tolerated each other, and then they went their separate ways, and they came back together, tolerated each other, went their separate ways. Everything was just repeated.
Yeah.
The difference was it took a little bit. The more they did that, each time they came back together, depending on their motivation, it took a little bit longer for those same issues to come up, but they always kept coming up.
So they never really resolved it.
They never really resolved it.
Departed from that.
Yep. They just
for a time.
stayed apart, and listen, it was a mess of stuff with drug. Not just those two, but the whole band were druggies, alcoholics. By today's definition, they were all cocaine addicts. According to this book, there was a lot of cocaine use, a lot of drinking, a lot of smoking, a lot. Let me say that again, a lot. According to this book, okay, The Making of Rumors, and according to Stevie's book, Gold Dust Woman, according to those two resources, there was a lot of drug and alcohol use. So that's going to skew things, right?
Right.
That's going to skew things whenever, how do you get to a good conclusion of conflict whenever you're really not yourself?
Right.
So that's one thing. Now, personally, in personal relationships, if something's got to change, you know what I mean? Or you keep coming together and you keep separating, keep coming together, separating. So maybe
I wonder if the conflict was, 'cause you got to imagine, even though there was drug use and alcohol and all this other stuff, God was still interested in them.
Mm-hmm.
Like God
No doubt.
continually seeks to draw us to Him,
Mhm.
and sometimes He does that through hard times. I wonder if the conflict that they encountered with each other was maybe God's effort to get them to face these things,
Mm.
and potentially turn things around and orient themselves in a trajectory that would ultimately have brought them to Him.
Yeah.
But because they decided to just ignore that and separate, nothing got resolved. They just ended up in
Well,
that space again.
if we're gonna talk about that part, we can't ignore how much of the dark side that Stevie Nicks was interested in.
Right.
She was a want-to-be witch.
Yeah.
She, according to both of these resources, and especially the Gold Dust Woman about her, she was a wannabe witch. Her most popular song was Rhiannon, and that was named after a old Welsh witch, is what she said.
Yeah.
And so that's darkness coming to it, and she liked that.
Right.
And I think I said this the other day. We talk in this studio so much, I don't know if we're recording or not sometimes, but she actually met with a Welsh witch, and the lady said, "Stevie, you better be careful, because basically you're a wannabe witch."
Yeah.
And if you're in there, you're in that world, I mean, very, very negative things can happen to you because you're not really a witch. You're interested in those things. You're interested in that dark side,
Yeah.
but you're not a witch. You know, it's not like, hey, I'm a witch. Now I'm a witch. You call me a witch. It's not the way, according to this, what I read, it doesn't work that way. So her being interested in that thing, from what I understand, it opens the door to the dark
interesting
side,
too,
right?
because the we'll call her real witch was warning the fake one that there's danger here unless you know what you're doing. But that's also a deceptive thing too, because
right. I mean,
the real
what do you
witch
trust?
is in a lot of danger herself that she doesn't realize. That's the deceptive nature of Satan.
It can't.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, let me give you the perception that you're in control, and maybe lead others into this same perception.
So, however that worked in
Yeah.
that environment, it was there.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, however God worked in there, He worked, and this is a place where, I mean, look at this studio. What do you think the dimensions of this studio are?
Oh, if you count the ceiling tiles, you can kind of estimate it, but it's probably 20 by 20,
Okay, 20 by 20. So let's
16 by 16.
let's double it.
Yeah.
And that was the studio that 5 people were sharing for up to a year at a time to record things.
Right.
That's a small place. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? They had to stay there for hours and hours at a time, 12, 16 hours at a time, at different times, recording things, doing everything,
Right.
for a purpose. But having that spirit in there, it's got to affect everything. It's got to affect people, and as sweet as she was and is, and generous and all that, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
You don't, that can't be ignored, that
Right.
that influence. And I put on top of everything the money. It was very interesting to read how Rush. I was also listening to Gaddy Lee's book, Fleetwood Mac. And it just depends on how a band writes out the contract. But with Fleetwood Mac, depending on who wrote the song, will depend on how much money they get. Right? If you play the bass in it, you might get some money. But if you wrote it, then you're getting the majority of the music. Rush knew that going into their success, and they did one album, the first album they did that way, and after that they went, man, listen, let's not worry. It's only 3 people in Rush. Let's not do that anymore. Let's just all give each other credit for all the music we bring in.
Right.
Okay, I'll bring in this music, and you're playing drums on it, you're singing or playing, you get the same amount of money as everybody else gets. And Gaddy Lee himself, the lead singer, said, man, that took care of so much conflict.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
We had no conflict. He said, we never talked about it again. We
Yeah.
came in and we did our stuff. With Fleetwood Mac, that was one of the most, according to these resources, one of the most influential things about their relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how about my song? And there could be beautiful songs. And some of
Right.
those songs were taken and put somewhere else. Stevie actually wrote a song, I think it was Landslide, which is, in my opinion, one of her best songs she ever wrote. She gave that song to her mother, which means every cent that song made went to her mother. Nobody else got any, and that song kept being put off and off from album to album.
Yeah.
So Steve was heartbroken,
Right.
because it was the last song that was cut on Rumors. It was supposed to be on Rumors, but it wasn't. So now my mother's not going to get any. She's not going to get any money.
Yeah.
Until I do another another album. So that's the generosity of her, who she was. But that's such a distinguishing characteristic of how that band interacted.
Right.
You and I never think. I would never think of stuff like that, but that's the business part of it.
Well, it's interesting too because like in my own business, I don't have employees, but I've sort of gotten myself into this niche of other engineers who are on their path to licensure, helping them start their own business. Because the dirty little secret of engineering is once you have a license, you no longer need an employer, because you can operate under that license and be in charge of your own paycheck, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Have your own clients, everything. And a lot of firms, I think, try to discourage that kind of thinking, for obvious reasons, right? You want your own business to grow. But I've never really been interested in, like, growing my own empire of a business. Yeah. I kind of like helping other people start theirs, and then letting them sort of be in charge of their own income and everything too. But one thing I've always done when it comes to like divvying up the profits from a project, I've always made it a point, like, if there's 3 people involved in this project, it splits 3 ways. And we don't, I don't take a larger cut just because I'm the one holding the license, or I'm the one that brought the project in, whatever. It's just we all 3 do it. I know, we're probably not all 3 sharing the work equally, but on the next project, it might that might shift. And and the sole reason for that is because I've seen so many businesses argue so much over money and who's owed what and all this stuff that I was never really interested in that. I'm like, as long as we're all paying our bills and we have our ends met, then that we should be fine with that.
Yeah.
And that's taken out so much argument and fighting, and it's made it makes the working relationship better, especially when everyone involved is realizes that I might have done more of the work this time around, but I may not have done most of the work on this other project, but we're sharing that. And I know there's a little bit of a socialist bent to that, where everybody gets paid the same no matter what they put in, and but that sort of gets rooted out over time. Yeah, because if that's a consistent thing, then then we address it. But
right, yeah, sure.
But yeah, I think kind of like to the point you were saying, that changes the working relationship. When the paycheck comes, it's not automatically a battle where everyone's trying to argue for the fact that, well, I deserve 38% as opposed to 33% because I did a little bit more work here. Right. And I see that happen in the academic world a lot, because when you're publishing papers, the order of the authors on that paper is an order of involvement as well.
Oh, okay.
The first one mentioned is the one who was the primary author of this paper.
Okay.
And it tapers off as you go away. And I've been involved in that kind of stuff before, and it's interesting to see the argument that ensues, because the higher your name is on that list, the more clout is associated with that. because papers are always referenced in other academic papers and stuff too. And so,
Okay.
like professors oftentimes are rated by not just how many articles they are involved in that are published, but also how much of the academic world references that work. And so if you're the number 10 author on a 10 author paper,
Doesn't do much for you.
doesn't do much for
Okay.
you, right? And so there's always this, like, when it's time to publish, there's always this jockeying for position. Like, I think I should be number 3, not number 4. You know,
Where's the where's the fairness in that? I mean, I'm sure there's fairness, but how do you divvy that up? How do you
Right.
say,
Yeah,
you know,
because
I spent
it's
this? That's
yeah,
so
it's
difficult.
not a hard, fast
Right.
equation that
Right.
calculates your place. It's
Right.
kind of like who's the best at
Wow.
jockeying for that position.
Yes. Wow. That's amazing. That is a lot like
Yeah.
what I've been reading about the bands.
But that that whole argument in the in the academic world, in the work world, in the you know, music world, it seems like that's always something that causes a rift
Right.
in all these relationships.
So how do you minimize that? I like
Right.
I like Russia's point of view. You know what I mean? I mean, like you said, if it's sounds like socialist, I don't. But if you look at it like that, and
Right.
doing it with 3 people in a place where these 3 people are going to travel all over the world,
Right.
that would be easier to deal with than perhaps what you're talking about, because not all the same people are going to be on every project.
Right.
Right.
Well, and I kind of, you know, say that tongue in cheek about it being socialist, because
Yeah,
socialist is the state is mandating that.
Gotcha.
This is
This is a
agreement.
choice.
It's an agreement between
Yeah.
3 people.
Right. Right.
And they're all mutually agreeing on that.
And I can't help but think that keeps them from having to employ other people on their behalf in order to represent them in these meetings.
Right.
Whenever we do another album, right? If we've decided this is what it is.
Yeah.
This is what it is, you know.
Right.
And I'm sure they still have to have representation, I guess. I don't know. I'm 6 chapters into the Gaddy Lee, the Rush book,
Yeah.
and doesn't say anything about them having representation.
Right.
So maybe they don't. You know, who would you rather be involved with? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A group of 3 that's going to split it and go
Right.
on, knowing you're
I
going to
hate
be.
that. I hate that confrontation anyway.
yeah,
I always hate
right.
argument about money.
Yeah. I know.
And so I would probably be a lot richer if I were more actively engaged in that discussion, but I absolutely hate it.
Yeah, but what do you? I mean, you're not hurting. You know what I mean? You don't.
Yeah.
You're not in need for anything, right? I think that's
Yeah.
more important to you. Just the
Yeah,
workflow, getting the work done,
Yeah.
doing a good job, having a good reputation.
Yeah, I mean,
spending
you
time
can
with your
always be in a
family.
position where you're like, I could use some more money, but
Right. Sure.
you know, I'm not starving.
Right.
I'm paying my
right.
bills. You know,
Right. That's right.
I would much rather be, you know, have a lot less money related stress in my life. You know, or I'd much rather have less office politics in my life.
Yeah.
Than, you know, a couple more bucks.
Right. Absolutely. 100%.
I like less stress. But I want to get back to something we were talking about.
Let's do it.
Earlier, because and this came up the other night in our small group that we lead in Gun Club, because we were talking about the recent happenings in Louisiana with that bomber and
Right.
you know, all that stuff, and excuse me.
The car.
Yeah, the car,
Yeah.
and then you were talking about some different experiences that have happened in your own life, like how do we determine if an event is good or bad, right? Because we look at what happened in Louisiana, and you know, by default we think that is a horrible thing, and a lot of times, the question becomes like, how could God let something like that happen?
It's a fair, very frequent question.
Absolutely fair, yeah, and it's a question that's been asked ever since there have been people and ever since there have been bad things, right? And so it's one of those ever present ideas that we struggle with: is what do we do with what do we do with the concept of evil? And you were discussing that a little bit the other night too. Well, this past Sunday, we were talking. The pastor was talking about the idea of faith, and every year, if those of you who don't come to our church, every year at the beginning of the year, pastor he gives us a word that's kind of like, this is the word that's going to identify us as a church for this year.
Sure.
Last year is the word believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I forget which one it was for that.
Praise.
Yeah, praise, and then, or I might have those switched, but praise, believe. This year the word he chose was faith. And obviously, if you're talking about faith, almost without fail, you go to what's called the faith chapter of the Bible, Hebrews 11. Kind of like if you're talking about love, you go to the love chapter. 1 Corinthians 13.
Love is kind.
Yeah, love seeks not her own, all that kind of stuff. And Hebrews 11 is about faith. And I think we often, the reason we have this podcast called Deep Dives is so that we can not just look at the verse, but we can look at the context of that verse, because I think Christianity as a whole, at least in modern America, we do the Bible a disservice in that we kind of take one verse or a couple verses or whatever, and we kind of like isolate that from its context, and we build something around that. And that's one of the reasons we have this deep dive, so we can get a better, more appropriate view of what this concept is in a context or in an environment where we can have a little bit more time to flesh these ideas out, right? And so Hebrews chapter 11, I'm going to turn to it. It starts out by saying, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And I say that a little bit incorrectly, that Hebrews 11 starts out with this idea, because we say this all the time. The chapters aren't part of the chapter designations aren't part of the Bible. The verse designations aren't part of the Bible. Those are put there so we can easily navigate Scripture. And it's obvious when you take all that stuff away and you just read that first verse of chapter 11. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for. That's obviously a continuation of a previous thought, and that's how the entire book of Hebrews is. It's like building upon an idea and building upon that idea and then building upon that idea. So you can't just start in chapter 11 and say, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It sounds cool to say that, but when you actually start thinking about the mechanism of that, like faith is the substance. Well, how is faith a substance of things that are hoped for? What does it even mean to hope? What does it mean to be the evidence of something that hasn't been seen? and Hebrews spends a lot of time developing that idea. And for example, in the previous chapter, it says, the law, having a shadow of good things to come and not the very image of the things, can never, with those sacrifices which they offered year by year, continually make the comers thereunto perfect. And what is that saying? So Hebrews is basically decoding the Old Testament for us. Okay. Because the New Testament is the entire Bible is all about Christ, but the New Testament is what we commonly associate as, this is the Jesus stuff. Right. And the Old Testament is all the other stuff. And we do that, incorrectly. It's all about Christ, but
it's talking about it's talking about Christ in the future or Christ in the present. Is that correct to say?
Absolutely. Because and that's what the author of Hebrews is pointing out here, because he's talking about the Old Testament law, which at the time this was written, it was just the Testament law, right?
Have to be a new one to be an old one.
Right, yeah. And even the new one's pretty old. It's more like the most recent testament.
There you go. First or second.
Right. But in the Old Testament, before God came in the flesh and sacrificed himself and took the punishment for our sins and rose from the dead, and before all of that, what was there?
Yeah.
Well, there was a mechanism that pointed forward in faith to when that would one day come. And everything in the Old Testament does that. We've talked about, like, when we talk about the Lord's Supper, we talk about how the Passover in the Old Testament was kind of a dual purpose. It commemorated, it memorialized their. Sorry, I keep putting my hand in front of your camera. Sorry about that.
That's my best view right there, Josh.
Right?
You in front of the camera, your hand in front of the camera.
There we go. Let's see. Chris is really getting mad at me right now. Anyway, I talk with my hands a lot, and that keeps going over in this camera. All right, so anyway, so the Old Testament, everything pointed forward to Christ, and the author of Hebrews is talking about those sacrifices. It said the law having a shadow of good things to come. So when you're in ancient Israel and you're headed towards the tabernacle or the temple, and it's the Day of Atonement, and a sacrifice is going to be offered on behalf of the sins of Israel, or even you're doing that personally. You're taking an innocent animal that is a perfect example of what those animals are, a lamb without blemish, and you're presenting that to a priest, and he inspects it and he certifies it and says, yes, this meets the qualification of being a sacrifice. It's an innocent animal that's pure, all this stuff. It can be killed in your place. And so, and then you keep doing that year after year. And the action of taking something innocent and killing it so that your improprieties and your sin can be assigned to that innocence that doesn't deserve to die is a picture. It's a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of the things. It can never, with those sacrifices, which they offered year by year continually, make the comers thereunto perfect. So that sacrifice, that killing of that animal, didn't make those people perfect. What that animal pointed to did, because Christ was that lamb, that spotless lamb that was that Hebrews explains. Jesus was that final sacrifice. This was the one that his sacrifice did work forever, and so this is what our a component of that faith is based on. It's the faith of our salvation, right? But there's another component of faith, because remember the question we originally asked was the difference between good and bad, and like how does evil, how do you answer the question of evil, the presence of evil in the world? I've been thinking a lot about this since our small group, and there's all kinds of answers to this, but what we often point out is, in the moment, those answers, those big philosophical answers, whatever, mean absolutely nothing.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if my loved one just died, I don't want someone coming in and saying, well, everything is actually good when you think about it. And,
that's not going to be received very well.
That's not. Absolutely not.
It's just inappropriate at the time. Doesn't mean it's not true. It means it's inappropriate at the time.
Absolutely. And I would agree 100%. That's, sometimes the best thing you can do is just shut up and not talk.
That's right.
Right.
Just be quiet.
Yeah, just be there, hug,
Yep.
whatever.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, this isn't the time for you to explain your philosophy on the universe.
Man, why do we all want to do it, though? Oh, my
Well,
gosh. We all
I
wanna
understand
do it.
because it's an awkward awkward time. Like, you don't know what to do, so you kind of like go to what, I don't know. It's like there's an awkward silence, and awkward silences are really difficult to sit through. Yeah. And our temptation is to fill that noise void with something instead of just, like
sitting in it.
Yeah, sitting in it. Be still and know that I'm God.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. And so I think, I don't know if the right kind of comfort can come externally from someone else.
Right.
Like there really is no resolution to that where someone could just come in, say a couple words, and oh, that's been resolved in my life now.
Right.
I think that resolution has to come from inside.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a more, I don't want to say more significant aspect of faith, because the salvation thing is, but I think as far as like how deeply we feel it is a big part of that faith. It's the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So going back into the example, so Hebrews chapter 11, it says, it's the evidence of things not seen, for by it the elders obtained a good report. Through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. By faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain. By faith Enoch was translated, that he should not see death. Without faith it's impossible to please God. By faith Noah, he prepared an ark to the saving of his house. By faith Abraham, went out not knowing whither he went. Talking about how Abraham was just told to leave his house, and God was going to direct him, and he did it. Through faith Sarah received strength to conceive seed. So, excuse me. It keeps talking about all these people who acted in faith in these like significant ways that altered the course of their lives forever, and it tells us that they lived in faith. And there's two aspects of that. There was the aspect of their faith, which all of these people, God reestablished His covenant with them. Not just that they would be like Abraham, you'll be the father of a great nation, all that kind of stuff, but there's a component of that promise that pointed towards a coming Messiah that would come from his seed. And, he reiterated that over and over again. So there was, and Hebrews alludes to that, of like, they all lived having faith in that promise, but they also all died before that promise came to fruition, before Christ, the Messiah came. But it also says that they lived in faith. And a lot of these people had bad things happen to them. The Old Testament is replete with all of these accounts of these people going through horribly difficult things, and good things as well.
Yeah.
Things that we would say are horribly difficult, horribly bad, or I almost said horribly good, or or awesomely good. But all of those things oriented their lives toward a coming Messiah. And all of these people were, God protected them, and He cared for them. And a lot of times the events that we might call bad were instrumental in their lives, that kept them from an otherwise destructive path. We've talked about one of the reasons for Israel's enslavement in Egypt, is a means of protecting them from the iniquity of the Amorites back in the Promised Land that would have destroyed them as a nation, because that's what it led to in Canaan. And so, yes, slavery was bad, but in the broader sense, it was a protecting mechanism for them. And that's not something that you could go to Israel and say, hey, guys, I know this sucks.
Yeah.
You're getting
Right.
beaten. You're working all day, but it's actually a good thing.
Yes. It's not.
That's not something you come to them. However, a lot of these people knew something inside that allowed them to navigate hard times better than a lot of us do today. And that is the faith aspect, that there are reasons that things happen that we might not understand at the moment. But when we look back at and this is, sort of a summarized internal dialogue of a lot of these people, right?
Yeah.
When I look back at my life, and I see events that I thought at the time were bad. I see how God used them to do something that wouldn't have happened otherwise. God has used them for good, and I'm reminded of that verse in the New Testament that says all things work together for good. Talks about as it relates to those who are called according to His promise, right? And but it doesn't say all things are good. It just says all things work together for good. Right. And so, how does that all relate? I'll only scroll down here. It says, verse 36, after it goes through this whole list of of people and their fate, like the great patriarchs of the faith and matriarchs of the faith.
What book is that, Josh?
Hebrews. Yep, Hebrews 11. I'm continuing in 36. Others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, they were tempted, they were slain with a sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. And it says in parentheses there, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and caves in the earth. All these, and these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise, God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. And then the very next chapter starts up, which here again, it's a continuation of the same thought. It says, wherefore, seeing we are also compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest ye be wearied and faint in your minds. So in other words, we serve a God who's in control of everything. And if we serve a God, if the core identity of God is that he's good and that he's perfect, then everything that happens under his watch has a similar attribute. Now, that's not saying that sinners are good. We have a free will. We have the ability to choose. But ultimately, we know where this is all leading. And all the events that happen in the meantime are a part of a much larger plan that ultimately orients the world and humanity towards that end purpose. And so it's a little difficult sometimes to say this was bad, this was good. Yeah. As Christians, in that bad, we have a comfort inside of that to know that, yes, this is a horrible thing that I have to experience, but I do know that there is a good behind this somehow. Mm-hmm. And that's where that faith comes in. But the cool thing about faith is, Hebrews 11, it goes back and it memorializes all of the things that these people went through and how it oriented them and history towards Christ. and I say this all the time. We say this in this podcast. God doesn't call us to blind faith. He calls us to a faith that's based on empirical evidence. Right on. And I think our ability to navigate those horrible times, like losing a loved one or hearing about a terrorist attack in New Orleans or whatever, is to realize, like, part of our responsibility in our growth in Christ is to develop that sort of mindset that, yes, bad things happen, but there's someone behind everything that's in control, and all of these things are working together for good. It doesn't mean that all the events themselves are good, right, but they all work together for good. And the more we internalize that, and the more we look back in our own lives, whenever we do see God bring us through a hard time, we put a bookmark there in our minds, and we can look back on that and says, yes, this time is horrible, but I know that God has also brought me through that hard time, and it's the same God, and he'll bring me through this. And it's really changed the way I've prayed, because our knee-jerk response is to pray, God, end this bad time. Take me out of this. Miraculously do something. We pray for a miracle or something like that. I've started praying, God, obviously I don't want to be in this situation, but while I'm here, please give me the presence of mind to see this from your perspective and to learn from this what you want me to learn from this, because all these events are important.
Yes. Can we simplify it and say we lose battles but we win wars?
Absolutely.
That's what I want people to hear, is that, man, many men, many women die in battles, and there's people homeless. There's just devastating things happening in battles.
Yeah,
we know how this war ends,
right?
And that's part of the faith, like you've been saying. And I think as we grow in Christ, and we have a little bit more wisdom with experience, I think going through those bad times and coming out on the other side better, that builds another step of experience of wisdom in Christ. Not losing your faith, but digging into it. And I thank God and my wife Donna and my relationship, every hard time we've been through, we've come out together tighter on the other side. And I know in this world that's not always the case with the relationships. Right. Sometimes that exacerbates things, and it makes it worse. It either going to bring you together or it's going to tear you apart. Thank God we have been through, and it brings us together. It brings us tighter. And I think that's the same way with our relationship with Christ. The more hard times we go through, and Christ brings us through those, we're tighter with him at the end. All right, regardless of what that is. We have that faith that at the end we're going to see our loved ones again. We're going to be with the people that we love, and we're going to be with him most of all. And we're going to be able, all the bad things that are happening are not going to mean anything. Right. Ultimately, they're not. They mean a lot right now. Yeah. You know what I mean? They mean a lot right now, but this is a stop. This is a temporary stop that we have a blessing to be in. Sometimes it doesn't feel like a blessing, but it is. Right.
So, do you know that old hymn, "It Is Well With My Soul"?
Yes.
Have you ever heard the story of its authorship?
I don't think so.
So the guy who wrote it, he had just lost his family. I forget where they were sailing from and where they were sailing to, but his family was moving from one continent to another. And he sent his family first, and he was going to come back. He was going to come later because he had some things he had to, to finish up or whatever. Well, they ended up, the ship ended up sinking, and he lost his entire family. And he got on a ship, and he, started sailing towards that direction too. And he told the captain, like, wake me up when we get to the spot where the other one sunk. And so he did, and he goes out on the boat, and he writes the words of this song. It says, "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." And so I think the ability to have that sort of mindset doesn't happen by chance.
It doesn't happen when you get saved. You don't automatically have that. Right. That is the hope and the long term. Anyway,
that takes practice.
That takes practice. Right.
And going back to what we were talking about earlier, comfort in those types of situations. Oftentimes, it's not able to come from the outside. It has to be some sort of transformation that has gone on inside, and I think it's interesting. The second verse of this, it says, "Though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control that Christ has regarded my helpless estate and hath shed his own blood for my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul."
Wow, what a bunch of good words there.
How in the world could you say that after your family had died, right? Man, it's because we talk about this in Gun Club all the time, right? That The ability to shoot quickly and accurately and repeatably is a perishable skill. If you don't use it, you lose it. And that's the same way that faith is, because if you're not continually, in the Word, praying, developing your relationship with Christ, if you're not creating those memorials in your own life and looking at the memorials that are encapsulated in Scripture, where God has taken people through hard times, and they've come through that on the other side victorious, surviving, or you've seen how what may have seemed like a bad time, God actually used that to accomplish something that wouldn't have happened otherwise. That builds up a kind of faith that you can deploy immediately in the middle of a hard time.
Yeah.
Just like, in concealed carry, when you're, when you're sitting there about to be robbed, or someone has your life is being threatened, that's not the time to start practicing trigger control, how to smoothly draw from a holster, sight picture, all that kind of stuff. That's not the time to start practicing. If that's the first time you've practiced, you're not going to survive that.
Yes. When
you're in a situation where life is hard, that's not the time to start practicing your relationship with God and your, how deep is your faith, and all that kind of stuff. You need to have been going to the range. You need to have been practicing. You need to have been reading Scripture. You need to have been praying, developing friendships of like-minded people who encourage each other and help each other through this. I think that's why, because here again, the difference between something that's good or evil sometimes is blurred.
Yeah.
Because an evil event is different than an evil person. Sometimes what we think is evil isn't.
Right.
It's a tool that God's using for something else. Had Nebuchadnezzar not taken a bunch of people out of Judah on his first siege, Daniel wouldn't have been in the palace.
Yes.
Probably Ezra and Nehemiah, those books probably wouldn't have happened, because Daniel's influence wouldn't have paved the way for it. On the second siege, if Nebuchadnezzar hadn't taken more people out, you probably wouldn't have had Esther and Mordecai that would have been present in the Persian Empire for Haman's plans to be thwarted. So these things that seem bad, maybe they were actually God preparing for something far more significant. And our ability to navigate that depends on our relationship with Him.
That's good preaching, Josh. That's good
Hopefully,
stuff, man.
It's convicting to me.
It's good preaching. That doesn't. We're not saying that it makes things easy. You're going to skate through life having that faith. Emotions are emotions, and they're going to be painful.
Yeah.
But having the long-term faith, the long-term goal in life, it helps. Knowing I'm going to see my dad again. That's all. That's fantastic, man.
Getting punched in the face still hurts. But if you've practiced, as a boxer has, you can recover really quickly.
Absolutely. Hey, listen, since I've been doing this deep dive into the music, I've wanted to pick up and call my buddy Kent 15, 20 times a day, and talk to him. That's what we used to do.
Right.
Every time I learned something new about Fleetwood Mac, I would have called him and talked to him about it.
Yeah.
Did you know this? And he would tell me something about, I can't do that right now. But, but we will do it again.
Right.
And I know that. That makes, a year ago, I couldn't have smiled about that. Now I can smile about that.
Yeah.
And that just comes with, just go through it. It takes you through it, Josh, thanks, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate you. Chris, thanks for being here. Appreciate you all.
Sorry, I keep putting my hand in the camera, Chris.
All right, guys and girls, thanks for watching, for listening. We'll see y'all next week.
Yep.
Thanks.